God of deep soil, you call us from our shallow selves to find our depth in your love. May we abide in you alone, who can teach us who we are and how we are all connected through Jesus Christ, the true vine. Amen. I was driving on Friday night to meet a friend at the movies at a mall when my mom called me, and I answered, using my Bluetooth, of course, and she said, "Are you munching?" And I'm like, "What? Am I munching?" No, I'm not munching, I'm driving. And in case you haven't noticed, I have not munched since sometime last year. And then she said, no, not are you munching, are you marching? And I said, marching? No, Mom, I'm driving. Marching where? What are you talking about? Like the saints go marching? And she says, I'm watching the news, and I'm just so upset with everything that's in the news today. You should be marching somewhere. This is my life as the daughter of baby boomer activists. Marching was the furthest thing from my mind on Friday night. It was the first, nice week since I think last fall. But despite the nice weather here, it was almost impossible to avoid the news last week as two great tragedies unfolded: the earthquake in Nepal and the aftermath and the eruption of a hurting community in Baltimore following the death of Freddie Gray. They both seemed so far to me and so distant and so different from each other. What in the world have they got to do with me or with each other, said my shallow self. Well, today's readings shed a little bit of light on that. In today's gospel, we have the last of Jesus' 8 I am statements in the book of John. And what the writer of John was trying to do was he was trying to preserve as much as possible about what they knew of Jesus, because the people who actually knew and lived and breathed and walked with Jesus on this earth were dying out, or most probably had already died out. But there were people who knew those witnesses, like their parents had spoken to their grandparents, and they wanted to write this down to preserve for later generations like you and me. But you know how difficult it is to describe someone, to describe who the essence of a person is? Let's take Father Jim, for instance. Who is Father Jim? Well, if you saw him walking down the street, maybe the first thing you would notice from a distance is that his skin is white. And as he got closer, you might be able to distinguish his gender, that he is a man. And if he's wearing his collar, you might be able to discern that he's a priest. And if you speak with him, you'll learn that he is the father of 2 great kids. And if you speak with him further, you might discover that he's an Episcopalian, and on from there. But imagine how difficult it would be to describe who Jesus is. Luckily for the writer of John, Jesus described himself in at least 8 statements, and they were these. These are what Jesus said about himself. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. Before Abraham was, I am, which is a little tricky, but that is saying a little something about his divinity, that he not only existed during those 32, 33 short years he lived and breathed and walked this earth, but that his spirit was here since the beginning, going all the way back to Abraham. And then he says, I am the gate, and whoever enters by me will be saved. And then, as Father Jim talked about last week, he said, I am the good shepherd. And then he went on to say, I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And then this week he says, I am the true vine. Well, it's the perfect parable for us just after we had our church work day, and we're working all around the church yesterday. And it's also the perfect parable on the heels of Easter and our Lenten season, because it's a season of pruning. In this parable, Jesus is the vine, and we are the branches, and God is the pruner. In Lent, we try to prune ourselves. We try to empty ourselves of whatever is not nourishing, whatever is crowding God out, so we can make room for God and so that there can be room for healthy spiritual growth in our lives. This is what pruning is all about, making us stronger so we will be more fruitful later. It's sort of like deadheading pansies, where you pinch off those early blooms, so it's not just the dead stuff. Sometimes it's live and vibrant, like with the pansies, and we pinch those early blooms so that there will be more blooms, more growth that will be more vibrant later in the summer. But in this parable, God is the pruner, and all we have to do is to abide in him. If we want to bear Jesus' fruit, then we choose to abide in him, which we learn in John 15:9, which I think might be next week, means to abide in love. We choose the abiding place of our soul, which is in love, and in love for all of our sisters and brothers. And that means abiding in love with all our sisters and brothers, whether they are suffering from natural disaster in Nepal or from human disaster in Baltimore. As John wrote in the epistle, we love because he first loved us. The commandment we have from him is this: those who love God must love their brothers and sisters also. So we must respond with compassion and love for our brothers and sisters suffering in Nepal who have lost family, life, homes, all of life as they know it, everything that they hold dear. But we must also respond with compassion and love for our brothers and sisters who are suffering in Baltimore, for the police officers who face fires, the young black kids who smash car windows because they are that desperate, and the mothers weeping for them to come home safely. This parable tells us that we are all interconnected through Christ, and we do not get sustenance on our own. Although the temptation is great to go it on our own, we simply cannot. We cannot go it alone. We cannot be that rugged, independent, self-sustaining, self-made individual, which is part of that American myth. To go it alone, trusting in your own strength, is to be cut off from the vine, the life source of Christ. The bottom line is simply this, and I'm going to use the words of Martin Luther King. All mankind is tied together. All life is interrelated, and we are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. What affects one directly affects all indirectly. For some strange reason, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. And to you I say this: this is the interrelated structure of Christianity. As John wrote in the epistle today, which came just before our gospel, God is love, and those who abide in love abide in God, and God abides in them. So I ask you this week, what in you needs to be pruned so that you can abide more fully in love, in that source of our Creator, in love for yourself and for others? And I also ask, what here in the Christ Church community needs to be pruned so that we can be more productive and fruitful in the world? And to that point, we're actually having a meeting about Apple Fest today, and I invite you to join in that conversation to see maybe what things need to be pruned there so that we can be more productive and giving and loving in this community in which we sit. And I ask you, or commend you to help deliver our message as Christians to this hurting world. It is that message of love and reconciliation. And there are communities near and far that need to hear that message. And I'll close with one of my favorite quotes of all times, which is not from Jesus, but from the poet Emily Dickinson, who says, love is the fellow of resurrection, scooping up the dust and chanting, live. Amen.